different than this animal? Why can't I say this is a kitten and this is a bearded dragon? What makes these different? What labeling makes it so I can call this a kitten for sure and this one a bearded dragon? So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about taxonomy, and that is the way of labeling different animals. So what we were talking about is that taxonomy is this way of labeling nature. So every scientist around the world, whether you're coming from anywhere around here, will use something called a scientific name. Now scientific names are going to use two parts. They're going to use the genus and the species. With those two parts, it makes a binomial nomenclature, which means bi means two, so an anomial name. So to name, and a nomenclature is the process of naming things, okay? So we'll always know what animal we're talking about. We won't be confused by common names. So like in America, one of the big ones that has many different common names is the mountain lion, cougar, puma, Florida panther. All of those are actually the same species. Florida panther is kind of out there, it might be a subspecies, but in general, it's all the same species. It's just different people called a different thing, all right? So scientists make up this name so we all know what we are talking about. We know which animal is which and how that works. But how you figure that out is actually by looking at the kingdoms and domains. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about kingdoms and domains and groupings, way we group animals. So the groupings is how we divide animals into taxonomic groups. These groupings are separated from biggest to smallest until we get to genus and species, which then makes us name, right? So we have a way to remember that. The saying, it's called, "Dear King Philip came over for good spaghetti." So we're going to start with the D. It is the biggest grouping, and it's called domains. Practice using these groupings. We're going to label a lion. What is a lion? What makes a lion a lion? All right, so we're going to go through the groupings and figure out what it is. So the first grouping, like we said, is the D, as in deer or domain. So domains, we have 3 of them, but these are really big groups, like very, very, very large groups. All right, so our domains are archaea, bacteria, and eukaryotic. All right, so archaea and bacteria are kind of similar. If we were to look at it through a microscope, we would see they are pretty close in their cell structures. So these guys lack a nucleus, all right? And then their organelles, or little pieces that are in there that make the cell function, are not clothed or covered in a membrane. So I like to think of these two are naked, all right? They're not wearing their clothes. While a eukaryotic cell, that domain is going to have cells that have a nucleus. It has organelles with pieces with their clothes on, pretty much. So they have their membranes on. So those membranes are protecting those organelles. It has this nucleus with this DNA or RNA, and this is a more complicated cell than the other two. So the domain eukaryotic is going to be our first domain to separate our lion. So here we have our chart. We're going to go through this chart throughout this video. So we're going to start with domain, all right? What was our domain for the lion? It was eukaryotic, right? So it has a complicated cell with all its clothes on. It has all its membranes and the nucleus inside. All right, so we're going to move on now to K, and that's dear king, and K is for kingdom. Look at that, it works out perfectly. All right, so K for kingdom, right? So kingdoms, we have several different groups. We have Protista, fungi, plantae, and animalia. So the protists are a kind of like a throw-in group. This is the group that anybody who doesn't fit anywhere else seems to go in there. Now, things can change, just like anything with science. Nothing is point blank always going to be the same. But for now, Protista is kind of the throw-in group, kind of like the junk drawer. All right, so they can be heterotrophic, which means that they use the sun just like plants do, so they get their energy from the sun. But also protists can be heterotrophic, so they can also eat other organisms. So then we go into fungi. Fungi is exactly what you think it is. It's a kingdom of fungus. So things that is fungus is things like, well, mushrooms, athlete's foot, Things like that is fungus, right? So fungus are actually heterotrophic. So that means they eat other organisms. Typically, they sit on what they're going to eat. So that's why athlete's foot, it sits on your foot and eats your dead skin and sweat, and then causes itchiness, obviously, because it's eating your skin. Or like mushrooms are going to usually be eating the dead stuff as it collects, right? Also, funguses have something called cell walls, and they're made of chitin. And that chitin is just like a bug shell. All right, it's the same stuff that skeletons of most insects are made of. Another kingdom is Plantae. Exactly what it sounds like. Kingdom of Plantae is the kingdom of plants. This means they're autotrophs, means they use the sun for their energy and getting their food. They have cell walls that are made of cellulose. All right, and this will be any kind of plant. This can be trees, this can be bushes, this can be grasses, etc. And then we have Kingdom Animalia. Kingdom Animalia is the kingdom of animals, all right? These organisms will always be heterotrophic, meaning they eat other organisms. So obviously our lion is going to be part of this kingdom. All right, so remember, we were talking about our lion, right? Its domain is eukaryotic, right? Meaning that it has a very complicated cell. We then talked about kingdom. Its kingdom is Animalia, which is the kingdom of animals, right? So we have deer, king, Philip. So we're on the P for Philip. That's phylum. This is the third biggest group, all right? So let's talk about phylums. With phylums, there's pretty much two different groups. Now there are several other groups, but if you really look at it, there's kind of like two. So first of all, like I said, phylums, there is more than two. But when I'm thinking of it, I try and think of two. And it's Chordata, which has a backbone, and everybody else who doesn't have a backbone. So to everyone else, there's phylum, like echinoderms. Remember we talked about in the virtual field trip? Echinoderms are sea stars and sea urchins, or things like Arthropodia, which can include things like lobsters. It's usually animals that don't have a backbone. Now, Chordata is the phylum for our lion, right? And that means it has a backbone. Just like my little skeleton guy here, right? It has the spinal column. Now, in Chordata, it does separate out some as we go down, but remember, this is the third largest group, so there's still a lot of organisms within the phylum of Chordata. It's only just slightly condensing. It's a lot smaller than domain, but still very, very large. So like we said, we're back to our lion poster, right? So domain, it's eukaryotic, meaning that it has a complicated cell. We're in kingdom, Animalia, because it's the kingdom of animals, right? And then we have phylum. Phylum's Chordata, right? Chordata. Think of it cord, like you have a spinal cord, right? Chordata, right? So it has a spinal cord. So our lion has a spinal cord, right? So our next one, right? Deer, king, Philip, came. So came over, right? So the C in came is going to be class, all right? Class. So class. Class, think of it kind of like class of 22, class of 21, class of 2023, class of 2016. So it's when you graduate, right, for ours. Still, that is a very big group, and that's how you have to think of it. This class is still a very large group, but it is smaller than saying all the schools in the United States, right? All right, so class is something that you'll probably be familiar with. This is one that we actually talk about quite a bit. So class is going to be things like reptilia for reptiles, or amphibia for amphibians, or mammalia for mammals. So I could get into what makes a mammal, a reptile, amphibian, a bird, but we don't have time for that. Because even mammalogy, which is the study of mammals, can take an entire year to learn everything. But for our example of the lion, it's going to be in the class Mammalia. And that's because it has fur, it has a placenta, and it gives its babies milk. So those are the three things we'll kind of look at for now. Yes, there is more complicated things in there, but this is what's important for us right now. Domain is eukaryotic, meaning complicated cell, right? Kingdom is Animalia because it's the kingdom of animals. Phylum is Chordata because it has a spinal cord. All right, and then class. Class is Mammalia because it has fur, a placenta, and milk. Right? So class Mammalia. So dear King Philip came over. So we're on the O for order. All right, order. So what is order? Order, for our next example, order is the parts that, again, it's a smaller than a class. It's kind of like saying the class of 22 in Diamond Hill Jarvis, right? So we're getting smaller. It's still pretty big, but it's smaller, right? So for order usually looks in the class of Mammalia is usually looking at either what the animals eat or how they look different. So for our example of the lion, it's actually going to be the order of Carnivora, right? Because it eats meat. So as I said, we have domain is eukaryotic for complicated cell. We got kingdom, Animalia, because it's the kingdom of animals. We got phylum, Chordata, because we have a spinal cord. We have class, Mammalia, because you have fur, placenta, and milk, right? And then we have order. Order, Carnivoria, because it eats meat. All right, so let's look at family. Family. So when we're talking about families, this is going to be close relatives. Just like you have a family, you have cousins, you have uncles, you have aunts, you have brothers, you have sisters. Some of you look very similar, some of you look very different, and that's okay. So in a family, it's kind of the same when we're talking about animals. So for our lion example, well, let me back up. For families, we can look at different examples, right? So there's family Canidae, which is the canines, things like dogs, right? We have the family Pinnipeds, which are things like seals. We have our family we're going to talk about for lions, right? We have the family Felidae, which is for felines or cats, right? So this is going to be all kinds of felines, whether it's the domestic kind or the wild kind, like our lion. All right, let's go over this again, right? We're trying to find the grouping of our lion. So D for domain. Domain is the largest group. It's eukaryotic because it has a complicated cell. We have kingdom, which is the K, the second largest group, which is Animalia, for the kingdom of animals. We have P, phylum, which is the phylum of Chordata because it has a spinal cord. We have the class, Mammalia, because it has fur, a placenta, and milk. We have the order, Carnivora, because it's a carnivore and eats meat. And then we have family, Felidae, because our lion is a feline, right? So we only have two more, which means that we're really coming down to the wire of what the animal is. The last two will actually make our lion's scientific name. The name that makes a lion, all right? So let's jump right in. So the first one is genus, right? Genus is the last of the groups. So this is getting into, we're going to Miss Slack's class. So we went from Diamond Hill, class of 22, right? From class of 22 to in Diamond Hill to my class, all right? So in my class, genus. For the lions, we have genus Pantheria. All right, this is going to be very specific. This is for Felidae, we have Panthera, or we have smaller cats, which have another name, okay? But we're not going to focus on that. The name doesn't matter. The fact that we're now separating, okay, they're all felines, but here's the big animals and the smaller felines, okay? And once that's separated out, we get to the big felines. So tigers, jaguars, cheetahs, things like that are going to be in Pantheria. These are going to be the big cats, right? So genus is Pantheria. We then get into species, the S. That's going to be our very last group and the most specific. It's going to be only for one animal. So let's go over. We got domain is eukaryotic because it has a complicated cell. We're in kingdom, Animalia, because the kingdom is animals. We have phylum, Chordata, because it has a spinal cord. We have class, Mammalia, because it has fur, a placenta, and milk. We have order, Carnivoria, because it eats meat. We have family, Felidae, because it is a feline. We have genus Pantheria because it is a large, big cat. And then we come to species. The species for lion is Leo. So with that, we have Pantheria leo is what a lion is scientifically called, which is actually the proper name when you're talking to scientists to call a lion. All right? So that means no matter what country you're in, no matter who you talk to, if they know scientific notation, scientific nomenclature, they will know Pantheria leo, no matter what language you speak, is a lion. They'll know what you're talking about. All right? So let's go over one more time. So domain, the biggest group, is eukaryotic because of complicated cells. We have kingdom, Animalia, because it's a kingdom of animals. We have phylum, Chordata, because it has a spinal cord. We have class, Mammalia, because it has fur, placenta, and milk. We have order, Carnivoria, because it is a carnivore. We have family, Felidae, because it is a feline. We have genus Pantheria, because it's a big cat. And then we have species, Leo. So as you can see, this isn't really that hard. The biggest concepts you need to understand is which grouping is the biggest to smallest. It's very important that you understand that. And then knowing that genus and species makes up the animal's name. So feel free to ask me questions. We will go over this again in class. You guys have a wonderful day, and please stay curious.